This is The Springer Show, the voice of conservative truth. And now, here is your host, Brian Springer.
Today, we're honored to have Representative Jarrod Lowery, a proud Lumbee tribe member and conservative Republican serving Robeson County in the North Carolina House. Representative Lowery, for all you Robeson County folks, that's Lowery with an E, serves as a member of the Finance Committee and the Pensions and Retirement Committee. He is Vice Chairman of the Agriculture and Environment Committee and the Emergency Management and Disaster Recovery Committee. He is Chairman of the Federal Relations and American Indian Affairs Committee. He's also a United States Marine Corps veteran and a conservative who believes in putting faith and family first. Jarrod, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you on the show.
Thanks, Brian, for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the good things that we're doing in Raleigh.
You have been busy in Raleigh as I've been looking over the bills. Just want to name a few for these folks out here that I saw that you were working on, somehow involved with, partnered with, sponsored otherwise. These are such bills as the no tax on tips, overtime and bonus pay, the driver's license designation for autism, the enhancing benefits for firefighters and rescue squad members, North Carolina Work and Save, the RAINS Act, and Kayla's Act, which is going to be a very important one. Your work is definitely shaping a stronger North Carolina. You've been quite busy up there in Raleigh. And before we really jump into much of these other bills here, is there any bills that you want to kind of focus on or mention?
Well, I would love to take a moment to mention the FRESH Act that I introduced about 2 weeks ago. In North Carolina, we have this program called the Home Producers Program, which was created about 35 years ago. And it's essentially allows folks to be able to make products in their home, food products like cakes, for example, and be able to sell them, as a business, as a small business, and the way you scale up a business. But when it was created, items like cheesecakes, anything made with cream, anything that needed to be refrigerated or frozen was not allowable. So right now, if you are a great maker of cheesecakes and you want to start, Brian's Cheesecake business, technically you can't start selling it. You cannot start selling it out of your home. And, you couldn't even do it for fundraisers. You could not sell out of your home. And so what this bill would do would change the language to allow you to be able to do it from home. As time has went along, I believe that we have technologies to allow folks to be able to keep foods, cool, refrigerated, or frozen, even when take them away from their home better than we did 30 some years ago. And plus, we are all more, as a consumer, more conscious about, what we should be eating and not be eating. I mean, if I'm at Brian, if I walk into Brian's Cheesecakes and I see some melted cheesecakes, I'm probably not going to eat those. But I don't think, if you're a great cheesecake maker and you want to start a small business, you shouldn't have to go out there and open up a commercial kitchen somewhere if you're able to do it at home. And the government shouldn't just be able to tell you no. We should have updated regulations that allow people to be able to be and have that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, I love what you said. That statement, I think I want to get it framed somewhere on my wall in here. The government shouldn't be able just to tell you no. I really like to hear that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great bill. I read over it just a little bit briefly, in looking at adding the refrigerated items to that bill. That's going to help a lot of people out, because I personally know some people in the county who make cakes for various reasons and whatnot. I know some that make some refrigerated cakes, but they obviously can't sell them because of certain laws and whatnot. But I think this will help them and help the entrepreneurial spirit in this county and across the state. So that's really a good thing to look at. Kind of jumping right in here, when I was mentioning some of these laws and bills that you're working on, there are some specific ones that kind of jump out to me as quite important. This one is going to be important across the state, but it really hits home here in Robeson County. What we're talking about is Kayla's Act. It's House Bill 505, I believe, which is known as Kayla's Act. It's a bill that was inspired by the tragic loss of 31-year-old Kayla Nicole Hammonds, who was killed in a Food Lion parking lot in Lumberton in 2022 due to domestic violence. Most people in this county know all about it. A lot of people in this county knew Kayla. So this is going to be very important for them. It really hits home for Robeson County, and it is a cause that really resonates with a lot of our listeners who value safety and justice. So let's kind of start with the heart of this bill. Can you explain to the people what Kayla's Act does to protect future domestic violence victims and how it honors Kayla's memory?
Yes, sir. Kayla's Act is very, very important to me. And like you stated, important to a lot of people across Robbins County. It's going to have a huge impact across the state. And essentially, what it will allow is for remote testimony in court for victims of domestic violence. A lot of times people are accused of domestic violence and the victims will not show up to court. And if you don't show up to court, it's thrown out. And that can happen, repeatedly, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And so the perpetrator, the person who's potentially, the person who's committing this crime isn't being prosecuted. What it's going to do is going to allow the victim to be able to testify remotely, in court, but most likely in another room in the courthouse, maybe another building across the street from the courthouse, but they'll be able to give their testimony to the judge on the same day in court without actually having to be next to the person who, they may fear for their life. And why that's important is statistics show that if the first time a person is convicted of domestic violence, they're 80% less likely to commit domestic violence again. Once that person's punished the first time, they're less likely to do it again. And what we're seeing is that, like the individual that tragically killed, Kayla, that was a habitual offender of domestic violence, and he never got his day in court. And hopefully going forward, what this will allow to do is punish more people who are committing these crimes, save lives, save children's lives, save families. And I tell you, right now, we already have some remote court issues with children, for example, with minors. The minors being abused. We allow minors to not have to sit in a courtroom with someone who may have been molesting them or abusing them. They can testify remotely. They don't even have to be in the building that day. And it works for children. It works for minors. And I think that domestic violence and child abuse are kind of in the same lanes as, it's most likely happening in the household with somebody that you loved or that you married. You might be financially tied to that person. Your life might be tied to that person, and it's hard to confront that person in court, especially, if it goes beyond physical abuse and it's psychological and mental abuse as well. Being able to get the victim to be able to testify in court while still protecting the constitutional rights of the accused is going to, I believe, lead to saving lives, restoring families, saving children's lives, and it's going to be a big step. And I think that how this will honor Kayla's memory is that there's going to be many, many folks, men and women alike, whose lives are going to be changed because they're able to punish those who are committing crimes. They're able to actually have those who have been abusing folks, face their day in court, be punished, and the families are able to move on. She's going to save lives. And I think a lot of people are going to be able to look back and never know it and say, Kayla's sacrifice and her story is what saved my mom or my dad's life.
Yeah, that's a real good way to put it there. It was a sad loss, and it was horrible to hear about. There's no reason to let that loss go without some sort of justice, and this is going to help future domestic violence victims. Absolutely. And you're saying that these domestic violence victims don't want to appear in court because they're scared of their attacker. The person who they're accusing of attacking them is right there next to them, so they don't want to be there next to them.
Yes, sir. And one of the few positives of COVID is the advent of technologies to allow people to have court without being in court. And you're right. If you have been living with someone who has been abusing you, maybe not let you leave home, maybe stalked you, will not let you leave home. It is very, very hard to look them in the face. I've never had that experience before, but I believe it's very, very hard to look that person in the face and say, hey, they're doing me wrong. When knowing, they could be waiting for you when you get home. They could be waiting for you outside the courthouse. And it's happened before. I think, and Kayla's example, they actually did go to court one time, and when she came out, her tires were split. And that's part of abuse. Now she has no way to go anywhere. So being able to tell your story while still protecting that person's constitutional rights to be able to face their accuser, even though they may not be in the same room, it's going to save lives, and it's actually going to get, I believe, it could lead to more domestic violence convictions, which in turn leads to less domestic violence cases.
Sure, absolutely. And You're mentioning that when she come out of court, her tires were slashed. Intimidation is going to fall, right there in with that abuse. It may not be physical abuse right there, but that's certainly mental abuse using intimidation tactics on your victim. So it is a pretty important bill to work on and get past. You've already, said how it's going to make a difference for the families in your district and across the state. So looking ahead, since domestic violence is always going to remain a challenge, even with strong laws, as strong as we can get them, what can we do going forward to strengthen protections for victims? Are there any sort of specific policies, community efforts, or legislative steps that you'd like to see to build on Kayla's Act?
I tell you, ever since Kayla's tragic accident, me joining the House and working with Senator Britt and others to come up with Kayla's Act, I have learned that there are immense resources, in the county and across the state for victims. Here in Robertson County alone, we have the Rape Crisis Center, we have the Domestic Violence Center, and other organizations that victims, most are women, but victims can go to and get services, get help, get some resources. I think number one, bringing awareness that you're not alone, and that if you're going through this, there are folks out there that can help you find a temporary space, help you gather your thoughts so you can go to the authorities. Number one, bringing awareness. And also, I think that I would say this as a legislator, I always say that none of us are jacks of all trades. We're a master of something or another. And I like to lean on those who have been lawyers or prosecutors in the District Attorney Association here in North Carolina. I like to lean on them and say, look, you guys are in the trenches every day. This is your job every single day. What can we do as a legislator to help you do your job, protect these victims? I think as we go along, especially as technology, changes, we may have the ability to do more to protect victims. I do know that we're using some experimental, I won't call it experimental technology, but we're piloting some technologies when it comes to getting restraining orders. A lot of times people will I heard instances that folks will get a restraining order on someone, and like you said, they will follow them in a car. The thing is that there's some technologies that are being used now that even if somebody is in that car, that we can put something that if they're in that car following that person, that local authorities can be alerted and that person going picked up for violating that temporary restraining order. That there's just some programs that the county's trying, and I think that we fully support the county doing anything we can to protect folks who are actual victims of these crimes. So whatever they bring to me, whatever they think, hey, that we should move forward with, I'm with it 100%. As long as it makes sense and it's constitutional, I'm full support of it.
Sure. And, I know you mentioned this kind of as experimental or a pilot program with the closeness, proximity of a victim and the accuser, maybe GPS tracking, something. But, I think as conservatives, we really have to be careful because that seems to kind of walk a fine line constitutionally where it could be argued, well, next thing you know, you're trying to chip somebody and track their every movement. And, conservatives, we don't want that.
Yeah. No, and I think you're 100% correct. That's why I say, if it makes sense and also it's constitutional. I know we're going to talk about, private property rights here in a little bit, but you really don't want to, even in the case of somebody has been accused of something, you still have to understand, they're still innocent until they're proven guilty. I think making sure that folks can testify is smart. Getting, like you said, getting past some intimidation tactics is smart. So how we go about that, how we balance that, I think is definitely very, very important.
Okay, good deal. You've got a couple other acts here, bills rather, that I did want to touch on before we get to the real meaty ones. The North Carolina Farmland and Military Protection Act. Reading through that, as I understand it, just to kind of break it down, sounds to me like you're saying China can't come over here and buy any land near a farm or an army base. Is that anywhere near right?
Yes, sir, 100%. And this is one of those where, I believe that your private property rights is probably the most important rights that you have. You've been able to own property. You're able to provide for yourself, your family. You're able to, be self-sustaining. You don't need the government. If you own your property, you can take care of yourself. But also, I do believe that farming is important. Our military bases, the security of those are important. So what the act says, if there is a company that is owned by a government, like a lot of them in China and Russia, if they're owned by a government that is hostile to America, they cannot buy farmland and they cannot buy land that a certain proximity around a military base. And I think that's smart. Number one, farming and agriculture is a national security issue. We don't want a company run by Putin of Russia to come over here and buy a bunch of land and not grow corn, or grow corn and send it to Russia, when we have people and we have animals that need to be fed. And also, we don't want them to buy land anywhere around the military bases. Now, to me, that's common sense. That makes sense. And it's written to the point where it's narrow enough to say, you're a landowner, it's your land, you have a right to sell it to whoever you want to sell it to, except for these groups over here that are hostile to America, and the companies are owned by the government. And I think that is narrow enough for people. I think most people will be okay with that. I think it passed the House unanimously, I believe. I know it passed the House unanimously last session, and we hope to get it through the Senate this time. But that's one of those where we're protecting private property rights. Those owners are still able to use the land however they want to, but also trying to protect, our economy, our safety, our security. It's that delicate balance. But I think that makes sense. If you talk to the average North Carolinian, they're going to tell you, there's no reason China should be buying up farmland or Iran should be buying up farmland. And that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a story. I can't give you specific details because I don't recall. I just recall the overview. This happened, gosh, I want to say maybe 2-3 weeks ago. A woman walked onto a military base, and she says she was looking for her dog. She was stopped. She was questioned as to, well, first off, how in the world did you get on here? And she just says, well, I'm looking for my dog, with cameras all around her neck. I don't know if she's out just taking pictures of her dog, but it sure seemed kind of funny. So yeah, we certainly don't want any foreign government members near our military bases to spy, to watch them, any number of things. That certainly would be a bad thing. As far as when it comes to Robeson County specifically, and I keep mentioning Robeson County because you're from Robeson County. Your constituents are Robeson County people, so it's very important to you. But all of these affect everybody in North Carolina. But when it comes to Robeson County specifically, it's a very large rural area, a very large farming area. This bill, you mentioned protecting the farms as far as coming here and growing, maybe sending it back to their own country, not producing this food and selling it here. Is that the only benefit that it could have for our agriculture in this area? Or are there other things that you might be looking at with that?
Well, I think, agriculture is the largest economy or largest sector of our economy here in North Carolina. I think it's over $100 billion a year in receipts to our farmers between row crops, animal, agriculture, timber, forestry is a part of agriculture. And it's very, very important. So I think, the premise of the bill is also a part of it is to protect farmland in general. We are expected to lose, I think, 1 to 2 million acres of farmland over the next few years from development. Because more people are moving to North Carolina. They're building houses. We do have some industries coming in, so we're losing farmland, but we have to protect that. At the end of the day, you don't want farmers squeezed out. You don't want developments popping up everywhere where it drives up the cost of values, where a farmer can't make ends meet and has to sell their land anyway. So it's part of the general thing that the General Assembly is trying to do and protect farmland. And how do we do it without looking at a farmer and saying you cannot sell, that you have to always farm? Because the government should never have that, never have that much power to tell you what you can and cannot do. But also, what can we do to lessen the impact and stress on our local farmers? And I can tell you this, I do believe there's enough insidious foreign actors out there that if they could start coming in and buying up all the farmland here in North Carolina, they would probably do it, and they'd run all our farmers out of business because they would all offer them, you make them an offer that none of them can refuse. And I don't think that our enemies would be shy about doing that if they could. So I think, first of all, banning these companies that are owned by these foreign governments who want to see me and you and everybody in Robertson County harmed from buying land is good. But also, we do have to take another step forward in how can we limit the losses of our farmland and agriculture over the next, 10, 20 years of development. I think it's a small part of it.
Yeah, that's going to be a very important part of it, though. Robeson County and across North Carolina is a large agriculture community. So
absolutely. And I can tell you this, Brian, there are industries that are looking to come to North Carolina because we do have some rural area. And, there is a not in my backyard mentality with a lot of folks, especially when it comes to certain industries. Right. And now even with high-tech industries just take up a lot of space, they're looking at Robeson County. Now, it's good for the jobs, to be good for, the property tax owners, be able to provide some relief over time. But at the end of the day, agriculture and being able to feed our population are very, very important. And, I would never blame a farmer for saying, hey, I've had 2 bad years in a row and somebody's offered me some good money for my land. I'm going to sell. But also, what can we do as a state to, aid those farmers when we can? It's important. It's a complex issue. It's definitely not easy, but we have to make sure. It's a national security issue to be able to feed ourselves.
So looking forward at these bills that you've got going on here, another one that I know is important to you is the REINS Act. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that and what that stands for?
Oh yeah, listen, I am a total fan of the REINS Act. So, there's always been a lot of talk over the years about this deep state or this bureaucratic state up in Washington. With these unelected bureaucrats that are making rules, they're making regulations, they're making life tough. Well, we have the same thing here in North Carolina. We have, bureaucrats that are unelected, that are making rules, they're making regulations. It's their job that is affecting all the North Carolinians. And sometimes they're regulations that we feel that most people feel harm the economy or harm a certain sector of the economy, maybe limit growth, make things harder for entrepreneurs. The people of North Carolina elect the General Assembly to make laws. From there, we instruct agencies or departments to make regulations and make rules that sometimes fill the gap or fulfill those laws. And so what we have decided here in North Carolina to do is pass a bill that says if there is a rule or a regulation that's going to affect the economy by more than $1 million, then the General Assembly has the final yes or no vote. And the reason I think that's important is those unelected bureaucrats, how well-meaning they may be, are accountable to nobody. Where I'm accountable to the people. And so if there is a rule or regulation that pops up that's going to affect, let's just throw something out there, affect the trucking industry. It's going to be a $10 million hit on the trucking industry. Currently, who are you going to complain to? You can complain to me, and I'll tell you, all right, we'll try to change the law. It'll be next year or maybe 2 years from now before we can get it done. Because that was a rule that was made over here in a department somewhere that you're going to have to follow until then. Or you're going to look at me and say, Jarrod, why did you vote for that? Like you did that. And I'm voting against you because you hurt my industry. I'm accountable to the people. There has been folks who criticize this and say, look, there are PhDs and there are people who are experts in whatever this field is making the rules, and we should allow them to make the rules. And that's fine. But in the General Assembly, none of us are jacks of all trades. We might be expert in one or two things. And we run through or we go through so much legislation. I take a lot of time to read, to research, to ask folks their opinion before we make decisions on complex issues all the time. So it's nothing new to come back to the General Assembly and say, hey, here's a bill that's going to affect this industry and it might cost 1,000 jobs or 2,000 jobs. So let's vote on it before we approve it before it becomes a rule that's going to affect the economy. So I totally support it. I totally support you taking essentially laws, because once a rule is made, it's hard to change. It's essentially a law that's set, and so if there's anything that's going to permanently affect North Carolina, why not allow General Assembly to have the final say?
Yeah, it sounds like that really kind of prevents the bureaucratic overreach in North Carolina.
100%. And I'm telling you, it happens. It happens a lot. There are countless numbers of rules and regulations. I really wish I had a book, and I want one day to see if I can get the central staff to print it off of all the rules that we have here in North Carolina. And the thing is, there's a lot of rules that are most likely old at this point in time. I will say that we, in 2011, when Republicans took over the General Assembly, we started instituting regulatory reform every year. And so we instruct these departments and agencies to come to us with old regulations that need to be done away with every single year. And those are for old regulations. But what about for the new regulations? So the REINS Act will rein in the bureaucrats on the front end from imposing regulations while we continue to rid old and bad regulations on the back end. I think it's a win-win for the people of North Carolina. And at the end of the day, the people who are making decisions that are really going to affect their economy should be the lawmakers, should be the ones that you elect.
Yeah, absolutely. And, deregulation is always a good thing in my books.
And I say I take full responsibility for every vote I take. So you can come to me and when we can talk it out. Like I'm accountable to the people, and that's the way it should be.
It sounds like this act's, going to have a real good positive impact on small businesses, medium, even large businesses, not only within Robeson County, but across the state.
Absolutely. And I tell you another thing, it's going to bring some of this out into the light, because everything that we vote on in the General Assembly, it's public. It's out there. We normally have 3 readings of every law. And so I assume that these regulations are going to be the same way, and it's going to be out there in the public for people to see. And so for these, groups that represent small businesses or represent different organizations, when these rules come up for us to vote on, we're going to hear it. We're going to hear it from the average consumer. But hey, this is bad. You don't need to do this. Or hey, this is good. Makes sense. You're going to have the people are going to have a bigger input on these rules and regulations that was once solely done just by unelected bureaucrats.
Anybody can go on the General Assembly website and look any of these bills up, all the wording, whatnot, and you can contact Jarrod or anybody in General Assembly, and they'll be happy to talk to you about them. You mentioned the people having control over things. That kind of leads me to this next bill. This bill is important to me because I know that you already have pushback on the other side of the aisle on this one. This is the Parents' Medical Bill of Rights. So just kind of give us an overview of the Parents' Medical Bill of Rights and how it might affect parents and families across North Carolina.
House Bill 519, the Medical Bill of Rights, the Parents' Medical Bill of Rights, is actually sponsored by my seatmate, Representative Jennifer Balcom from Henderson County. And she is she's a fierce advocate for agriculture, and she's a fierce advocate for women. She led the whole, allowing only women in sports act last year. So women athletes and also parents. And I'm proud that she's my seatmate. But she said it best, if I may quote her, and then I'll explain. She said it's going to grant parents more insight into their children's health by repealing existing laws that grant the child privacy in certain circumstances. Now, I'm a parent. And I have a beautiful 2-year-old, by the way, who is the light of my day, and God has blessed me so much. Excuse me, Jesus absolutely is the light of my day, but she's number 2.
Yes, absolutely.
But as parents, the children are our responsibility, and God has given us His child to raise His child, to take care of this child, to protect this child. And so, anytime you take your child to the doctor, if there's an important medical decision, you're expected to have input. And until that child gets to the point where they can understand what's going on, you should have the sole input on that child's medical decision. My child's 2 years old. There ain't no way she knows what's best for her. But me and my wife, by taking all the information from doctors, we're going to make that decision. And it's the same way for a child. Child reaches that age of 14, 15, or 16 years old. It goes to the doctor and they have, let's say, some substance abuse issues, or they have an STD, or they're pregnant. You should not send the parents out of the room to ask the child, okay, well, what do you want to have done? What do you want us to do, in this regard to you being, addicted to these terrible substances? And right now in North Carolina, that's what they do. You'd send the parents out of the room, if this child has an STD, and they're going to decide, what's the best route, for treatment or for their med. So right now, the parent is taken out of these situations, and it makes no sense. I mean, really what's happening is the government is saying, all right, I'm going to be the daddy, I'm going to be the mom, I'm going to kick you out of the room and allow a child who we already agree by our laws that you're pretty much adult when you turn 18. You can join the military when you turn 18. You can buy a gun when you turn 18. You can vote when you turn 18. You have to wait till you're 21 now to buy a pack of cigarettes or a drink.
Right.
But, we agree that once you reach an age, you can make those decisions. But before then, the government should never take the parents of a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old out of the room because of a certain medical condition. As I stated, the parent is responsible for the child. They love that child. They're raising the child. They are responsible for that child. They protect the child. And this is going to allow the parent to stay in that room. I don't know why we have laws that says if a child is addicted to an opioid or addicted to alcohol at 15 years old, we're going to throw the parents out of the room so we can talk to the child about their health issues. It makes no sense to me. To me, it seems like that's when you want the parents there the most, so they can be there with their child to help make the best decision. Apparently, some other decisions were made that may not have been the best, and that child, because it's still a child, even at 17 years old, they need that support of a family. And it's really bad to see that there's folks that only want to grow the amount of reasons of throwing the children out of the doctor's room or the patient's room with their child. And it makes no sense to me.
In recent polls right now, about 70% of North Carolinians support requiring parental consent for all major medical decisions for minors, compared to around 25% who favor more youth autonomy. There is a Wake County Democratic representative, Allison Dahl. She has been fighting this one tooth and nail. She has introduced legislation to strip parental rights even more and allow minor children to make more medical decisions for themselves, including gender-affirming procedures and transformative surgeries. So with that in mind, why is this bill very critical right now?
I tell you, we are still having debates in North Carolina and across this country about children's health in ways that we should not be having debates about children's health. I believe that God made everybody the way he intended it to make it. And I don't believe God made mistakes. I think each one of us are beautiful. We're unique. We're individual. Right now, you do have some folks to where, I'm going to tell you, Brian, I'll just get down to the basic why things going on. I truly believe that God's plan was for the family to be the foundation of society. Mother, father, children, loving parents, children, that is the foundation of society. And I think that there are people out there who believe that the way we break that down so the government can have more control is we get the government from being a partner to being paternal. And we allow the government to have more and more of say in our children's lives than the parents do. And that's how you break down the family. That's how you get more reliance. And I don't think this is a big conspiracy at all. I really don't. I think if we see over the past 70 years, there's folks out there who want the government to be more involved in our lives, especially when it comes to our family. And I think that we have to continue to make stands to say, look, we are not going to get in the way of parents from being parents, taking care of their children, being the most important, people in their children's lives. Parents have a responsibility, and it's not the government's right to take that responsibility from the parents to take care of their children. And I think that's really the crux of it. I mean, if you want to get to the down and dirty, I just truly believe that there's people out there who feel that the government could probably do a better job at raising your children. And I think that we have to stand back and say, no, that's not the case. We talk about taking the government out of the waiting room or out of the doctor's office. Well, anytime you stand back and take the parents out, something has to fill that void. And I can tell you right now that a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 7-year-old deciding if they should have genital mutilation, somebody's going to go in there and help them make that decision, because that child at 9 years old cannot decide whether they're going to have this genital mutilation surgery. Unfortunately, it's a battle that we have to have, but I trust parents more than I trust the government, more than I trust folks with a PhD that tells you that a child is 9 should probably go out and vote.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I never thought about transforming my gender. I never thought anything about it. That was never a fleeting thought of my mind. So these children now who, they want to go to school or go to their doctors and say, look, I want to be the opposite sex. They're getting taught this by somebody, obviously.
Yep.
And allowing them to go in there and do this, with Representative Dahl and her legislation to allow these children to go in there and tell the doctor, yeah, I want you to transform me completely. It's going to affect them later in life. And that's something I've talked about on previous shows, and I'm probably sure I'm going to do an entire show on it soon. It's not good for their mental health, and it's going to mess them up as people later in life.
And I agree. We have laws here in North Carolina that says, you can't get a tattoo until you're a certain age. And we do that because it's a permanent mark on you. And so you should at least have the mental capacity to be able to make that, because it's a permanent decision. And it's the same way with gender reassignment surgery. I mean, that is a permanent decision that is being made. And I don't think anybody under no 8, 9, 10-year-old can really make that decision. I can tell you as a 10-year-old, I didn't know what clothes to put on every morning. I mean, somebody had to. Mama was probably still telling me, hey, it's cold outside. You need to put on a jacket. I can tell you she was telling me that.
Right.
So I just don't see the issue in allowing parents to be there with their child to give them comfort, give them a love embrace, give them confidence, and help decisions to be made for their child's health. I just don't see the controversy.
Sure. So this bill, it allows the parents to make these decisions. There's some who say that that's going to be, that could provide overreach. And by overreach, they're taking away rights that they feel these children from 16, 17, maybe even as low as 15, believe that they have or should have. How can this bill avoid any overreach issues and still protect parental rights?
So how I feel that this bill will make sure that we avoid any overreach is, simply by taking out any type of ambiguity that there is right now. Because I can tell you, if you go into a hospital right now with a 16-year-old and they have STD or they're pregnant, and then the parents come in, there's going to be a fight. Because when they tell the parents to leave, there's going to be a fight. There should never be a gray area, especially with the law. It's rather black or white, right or wrong. And I think that, knowing from up front that the medical professionals that cannot make a decision before the parent is informed, I think is how you get away from a lot of potential conflicts down the road. Like, we should know, all right, no, your decision won't be made until your parents are informed. Because we do that with just about every other issue. So why can't it be uniform across the board? And I'm telling you, I don't know if there was a time where there was a misconception about the way parents are, but my life changed. I really have a changed person since I had a child. And I can tell you, I used to probably figure I was hardcore on a lot of things, but boy, when that little girl looks at me, she knocked over something last night. And I said, Madison, what are you doing? And she looked at me. She didn't know what she did, but I'm telling you, she looked at me in her eyes, and I was like, I can't even be upset.
Oh, yeah, it's something special.
Right. I really do believe as parents, we love our children. We want our children to make the best decision. So how we get past any type of future potential overreach is saying, hey, we're in this decision from the beginning, from the start. And we're going to help you make that best decision. Because at the end of the day, if they're a 16 or 17-year-old, they're going to be 18 making their own decision. And I guarantee you the 18-year-old probably might call mama and daddy and say, hey, I've been told I need to have this surgery, or I have this condition. Can you give me some advice? So,
yeah, absolutely. A lot of that's going to, it's going to start when they're very young and being a family unit. As you mentioned before, family being the basis, the foundation. And I think that's where it's going to start. And through the years, you show them love, support, and teach them the right way. Keep them close to God. And that's going to present in 16, 17, 18 plus years. A lot of people can say that that's going to kind of be a real fight there with that particular bill, back and forth with the left and the right. And I agree. And I'm going to be watching that to see how that one plays out. But now there was one that I was particularly interested in. And my initial reaction to this one, Jarrod, I'm going to be honest with you, I was not happy with it, because my first thoughts are, okay, we'll go back to the Washington Redskins, who are now the Commanders. We go to, Aunt Jemima, who's no longer there, the Quaker Oats guy, who's no longer there. During this period of the cancel culture, and the left was canceling everything that was deemed quote unquote racist, quote unquote offensive. And you know where I'm going with this. We're going to talk about the bill. It's called Ending Offensive Indian Mascots. So that bill stuck out at me, and I said, no, I've got to read this one. I opened it up and I looked. I read through the entire thing. Luckily, it was not full of lawyer jargon, so I could understand it. There's a lot of things in there that I really want to unpack. But first, I want to make sure I have this information right. Mm-hmm. I read that you are the only Native American legislator in North Carolina General Assembly. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would actually think it'll be, a larger population with the Native American population that we have in this state.
Yeah.
But you are the only
actually, I am only the 6th in North Carolina history. So
Wow.
there hasn't been a lot of us.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and I mentioned this earlier. Jarrod is also a proud Lumbee tribe member. Of all the Indian tribes around the country, Lumbee is one of the most unique that I have ever come across myself. They have a very rich and deep heritage and culture. So given that, Jarrod, is it safe to say that you see the introduction of this particular bill as deeply personal and culturally significant?
Well, I say this. I think the bill introduced the bill the start having a conversation. But if I may back up to the inspiration of the bill, so I believe as a public servant, you should serve 100% of the people. Now, you're not going to agree with 100% of the people. 100% of the people ain't going to agree with me. And I'm known to going into areas and having a lot of hard conversations, sometimes, getting yelled at, but listening to people. And I think at the end of the day, even for those, like in this last election, the 35% of people who didn't vote for me, I sit and I'll listen to you because I'm a public servant. I work for everybody. The seat doesn't say Jarrod Lowery. It's the people in District 47.
Sure, yeah.
And I had some constituents come to me in my first term and say, look, we don't like these Indian mascots. Some of them are very, very offensive. Some have no historical ties to any tribe whatsoever. So can we get rid of them? Can we remove them? And I was honest with them. I said, guys, I said, look, as a new member, I have a lot of stuff going on. I don't have the bandwidth. And maybe next session we can introduce a bill to start having conversations. And so this year, the same group came back and they said, all right, Jarrod, you're no longer a new member. You're no longer a freshman. You have a little more bandwidth. Can you do some more? And I said, bring me some legislation from other states. Let me put some together. Let me start drafting something up and let's see what we can do. And so the bill was born out of me listening to constituents who, to them, this is a very deeply and personal issue. And I think that at the end of, and I've also had other pieces of legislation where I've had, constituents come to me and say, hey, I want this done. I'd like to see this, be done. I have one constituent, actually two now. Each year I've introduced a bill to increase the maximum speed limit on the interstates from 70 to 75 miles per hour. Now, I have the same constituents come to me every time and say, hey, let's do this. We want to do this. And then come to find out, another constituent came to me with a concern, and by raising it would fix their concern as well. With getting speeding tickets in other states, it's kind of confusing, but I try to listen to constituents, and I'm always honest. And I was honest with this group. I said, guys, there's going to be a lot of pushback. There's going to be members I already know that's going to say, no, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to support this. I said, but for you and for the community, I'm willing to have conversations. And the bill is kind of written in a way to where it looks like it's banning everything, to be able to make compromises and come back to the middle so we can have a conversation on, if there is mascots that people really deem offensive that we need to get rid of. And for me, where if anything personal comes in, I grew up a Braves fan. My family grew up Redskins fans, and they still call them the Redskins. I Florida State Seminoles. I mean, everybody was Florida State Seminoles there for a while, fans. But what stuck out to me when I was listening to this group as they made presentations of, hey, this is what they've seen, is not, part of it, the biggest thing to me is the folks that show up to football games on the opposing side of these teams, who are like the Indians or the Chiefs, and they get this fake mock-up head of an Indian and they stick an arrow through it or a knife through it and they're waving it around in the sky. And I'm like, wow, that's going a little bit further than what I think a mascot, is, that you're, basically making up an Indian head and sticking a knife through it because you just slaughtered the Indians on the football field. And so I get it. I understand it. And I told them I was willing to have conversations. And as I was honest with them in a meeting last week, like we've run into a lot of opposition and leadership opposes it. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But the bill was born out of me wanting to sit down or willing to sit down and listen to constituents. And that's kind of where it was all born out of.
That's probably one of the best things you can do. As you mentioned several times, you are an elected representative, and your job is to represent the people who elected you. You do a great job of that. And Robeson County does have a very significant American Indian population. Since you've introduced the bill, have your constituents responded positively to it?
So the ones who this was the issue to them, yes. But I also have had a lot of conversations about the why. because like I said, a lot of folks in Roberts County grew up Redskins fans because that was the closest, NFL team. And back when Joe Gibbs was the coach and they had the hog mollies and they were running wild. And nobody likes the Cowboys, or no offense.
Come
to
on now.
Cowboys
No. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do it. Look, I loved having you on here, but we're going to have to cut this short now. I mean,
those that like the Redskins definitely don't like the Cowboys. But so to me, is it the most important issue to me? If I'm being honest, and I'm honest with those who it's important to. No, it's not. But to my constituents, it's important. And sometimes you file a bill to get people's attention so you can have conversations. And I've had some really good conversations with other legislators. Most of them are just, hey, we got a high school in our community and we're not moving, and that's fine. Like I'm totally fine with that. I'm always fine if somebody supports or opposes a bill. But I would tell you this, Brian, I'm not a rhino. All right, I see a lot of folks want to call me a rhino because of this bill. But I tell you, if you look at my voting record, if I'm a rhino, then we're all old General Simmons a bunch of rhinos at this point. But honestly, that was it. And you know what? If any group of constituents come together and they pretty much write a piece of legislation that I think, doesn't necessarily go against my core conservative principles, I'll be glad to help them file it and start having conversations. I don't think, with all opposition, this year the bill's not going to go anywhere. I've told them that. But that's really where it comes from.
Yeah. And, sometimes the conversation can be the most important part of it. I have had people who I've talked to about this bill particularly, and they've actually used that exact term. Well, it sounds like a rhino. And I say, I can see why you say that. However, you're basing that on one bill. I said, go and look at all the other bills, how strong he supports veterans, the agriculture community, North Carolina as a whole, and I think you would change your mind. But speaking about this bill in particularly, the American Indian mascots in North Carolina dropped from 73 schools in 2002 to 34 schools in 2025, per the State Advisory Council's report. So some progress has been made, but there are 34 schools that still remain. There are those who argue not all mascots are offensive and can actually honor Native heritage. I know plenty of Native Americans myself, and I've talked to many of them. The majority of the ones that I have talked to said that it doesn't bother them. And they're thinking, mascots such as Braves, Warriors, those are the top two to come to my mind. Even the Redskins, I brought that up, and they said, no, I don't really care. Of course, it's not going to be everybody. It is going to be offensive to some people. I don't think that you believe that all American Indian mascots are inherently offensive.
I don't believe that they're all offensive. I really don't. I went to UNC Pembroke and we're the home of the Braves, and I'm proud to be part of the Braves. And I grew up over in the Wakulla community. I didn't go to Oxnard Elementary, but they're the Warriors. And if you go to Oxnard Elementary, they got a big old Indian sitting on a horse right out front of the elementary school. So I don't think that they're all offensive. And I go back to the thing that caught my eye was there was no connection to any type of tribal community or population whatsoever. And it was the way the opposing fans would mock and ridicule, Indian people. And I sat and I thought, I was like, man, you wouldn't do anybody. If they were the Fighting Irish, you wouldn't be sticking, a knife in an Irish man's head and waving it around. I mean,
I wouldn't put it past these sports fans now. They get crazy.
Hey, you know what? You got a point now. You got a point. So, but I don't think they're all offensive. And I think that, having good conversations with folks, and I can tell you, most folks I talk to would say, look, there's more important things you need to focus on, need to deal with. And I think it's very, very valid. And there's a lot of good things that we do need to focus on. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. I think there are schools that are slowly going away from Indian mascots. And I say, like warriors. Every culture in the world had warriors. Every culture in world history's got warriors. Chiefs, they all had chiefs. I mean, so, but doesn't necessarily that warrior, have to depict an Indian? That's a legit question.
Sure. I would say any school mascot I've ever seen that said warrior or chiefs always had a depiction of an Indian.
I was a Marine, so we consider ourselves athletic warriors. So, but there's warriors of every culture, chiefs of all cultures, and so I I have no problem with giving a group of constituents, because this is really a niche issue. It's not something, for example, like the Parents' Medical Bill of Rights that touches everybody in the state just about. It's a really niche thing, and if I am helping them have conversations with groups or communities, great. It's not going to change the direction of the state whatsoever, or what we're trying to do here in the state. But as I said, I do work for the people, and I tell you, the people can fire me every 2 years. It's their total choice, whatever their decision is. But as long as it doesn't go against my core beliefs and it helps them, address an issue that's important to them, I'll be glad to help them out. I'll be glad to push it. But like I said, I don't think the bill is going to pass. There's a ton of opposition. I mean, I got more emails about this bill than any other bill I've ever sponsored.
Wow.
And all across state, some from the community, but all across state. And they all have some valid points. I mean, you got some folks who, like you said, they've really worked on it to get their mascot to be more respectful and all that stuff. And I mean, that's, it's the least you can ask for, in my opinion.
Yeah, and even if this bill doesn't pass, you've already gotten from 73 down to 34.
Right.
So having the discussion, bringing the subject to light, is obviously doing something. And even without this bill, they may all go away anyway.
That's true. I mean, we don't know. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
But let's say this: a lot of folks grew up in Robertson County Redskins fans, and I know that.
Oh yeah, hey.
And they still call them the Redskins. They still say "Hail to the Redskins." So.
Oh sure, yeah. I mean, as a proud Cowboys fan, I've met quite a few of these Redskins fans around here who told me all about the Redskins.
Right.
So, Jarrod, I mean, that's amazing. These bills that we've talked about today, and the bills that we didn't talk about, but just kind of touched on a lot of things that you're working on. You're working really as hard as anybody in Raleigh could, especially for the people of Robeson County and the great state of North Carolina. It is oftentimes a very thankless and tiring job to be an elected representative of the people. But I, for one, am very happy to have you as our representative, and I hope that we can keep good people like you in the state capitol working hard to improve North Carolina and our individual districts, while at the same time maintaining the values and beliefs of the people that you serve.
And I appreciate that, Brian. I say the Lord has blessed me and has given me the opportunity to serve the people, and I want to do the best of my ability. I was talking with someone today that if the time ever comes where I feel like I'm not effective, I'm not going to be somebody who tries to hold on. I'm going to go home because I spend enough nights in Raleigh away from my little girl as is. I appreciate the opportunity to serve, and I'm really thankful that the people give me this opportunity.
Jarrod, thank you for being here. This is Jarrod Lowery, ladies and gentlemen, is North Carolina District 47 representative serving Robeson County, North Carolina. Jarrod, I really appreciate you being on the show with us today and talking to us. Man, you're welcome to come back anytime and talk to us.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.